Welcome to CMMC Unacknowledged, where we ask our resident expert some of the unanswered questions that were asked during last month's CMMC-AB Townhall meeting. My name is Todd Stanton. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for all things CMMC at Etactics. And I'm joined by the Senior Information Assurance Manager at Rain Associates, Ty Wittenberg. Welcome, Ty.
Hey, Todd, thank you so much for having me, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. All right, in this episode, I'm going to walk you down a path that I took over the next series of questions, and you let me know if at any point in the path you don't agree with the assumptions or interpretations that I'm making from the documentation. So I'm going to start with a very easy question. Based on that level 2 scoping guide, which categories of assets make up the CMMC assessment scope?
Which make up the CMMC assessment scope? I think you're looking at your controlled unclassified information assets, right? And then I think what also brings it in scope is your security protection assets that are looking out for that data.
And so would you consider the contractor risk managed assets and specialized assets as belonging to that quote unquote CMMC assessment scope?
So if they are not transmitting, well, let me back up. As a provider, as a practitioner, I want to identify pretty quickly how the data flows through the organization, whether that be electronically or with electronic work orders or analog through paper travelers. I also want to identify, how, like I said, how it flows between computers, between the client and my client and the organization that they're doing the work for in the defense industrial base. If after mapping their environment and the contractor's risk managed assets, some of them are not germane to CUI, then in my opinion, they fall out of scope, right? And I can say that because for whatever particular reason around role-based access or tools that or softwares that those systems, those endpoints are on that system with but aren't utilizing CUI, aren't relevant to the scoping for ensuring that we're safeguarding that information system.
So I understand the argument that a contractor risk managed asset or specialized asset would not be assessed against all 110 practices. But when I look at that table from figure 1 or table 1 from this level 2 scoping guide, it categorizes the 4 first categories as assets that are in the CMMC assessment scope. So looking at that table and just taking that definition from the scoping guide, with the understanding that we're not looking at all 110 practices for what's in the CMMC scope, but would you now agree that the contractor risk managed assets and specialized assets fall under that definition of being within the quote unquote CMMC assessment scope?
I think they do, but they're limited in scope because if you're writing a good system security plan that has a network diagram, you clearly can state on the network diagram what systems are specific to CUI. I would say if you are in an environment where the network is not segmented as well too, then I would challenge that, it could potentially from a threat landscape put those assets in because of lateral movement by a threat actor, but that is an assumption through threat and risk and not necessarily taking a deeper dive around what those controls are in place specifically around the security protection assets to safeguard the network.
Okay. So the next part of my path is the definition of security protection assets. So looking at that level 2 assessment scoping guide, we get a definition that says these assets provide security functions to the CMMC assessment scope, which again refers to these 4 categories of CUI assets, security protection assets, contractor risk managed assets, and specialized assets.
Right.
Are we in agreement there?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I guess my question goes back to if I read page 7 of Rev 2 NIST SP 80171 under this big blue block that says CUI security requirements. There's a definition in there of a security protection asset, really just relating to assets that provide security or protection capabilities to CUI assets. That being assets that process, store, or transmit CUI. So my question to you is, if the definition previously of a security protection asset was just focused on assets that protected CUI assets, has there been a slight alteration in this definition to include now assets that provide security functions for contractor risk managed assets or specialized assets as well?
Yeah, so if we go back to table 1 as well too, right, and you look at the very last box, if I'm not mistaken, it says to you that you would want to compare those security protection awarenesses against the CMMC practices. I think the reality here, Todd, is that clients, when they institute policies or institute the rules in their firewalls and segmentation with switches, and then their antivirus, or anti-malware type activities, or if they're even advanced and they have like a cloud access security broker, they're applying that across the entire enterprise. So can they get more granular with the segmentation, and the hardening or, demilitarizing of the putting, those individual systems, I guess I should say, behind their own individual firewall? Sure. But I think, when you're looking at the policies and procedures, you're looking at the enterprise as a whole. So I get where that's going. However, it's still about what systems are touching the controlled and classified information. And so I think assessing it against the practices, documenting accordingly, really just speaks to the maturation of the organization's risk framework, risk management, and security program.
Okay, and so kind of on a little bit of a tangent here, but still along the same vein, the Level 2 assessment guide provides a pretty loose definition of organizational asset. Says anything that has value to an organization, and it lists several examples of related hardware like locks and cabinets. So based on this broad definition, does that mean to you that an organization seeking certification would need to maintain an inventory of organizational assets that provide physical security, such as locks and cabinets?
When I was thinking through that as I read it, and the question you're asking me now, I think that's really addressed through policy and procedure. More importantly, if you have more of an analog process as a paper traveler, which I think that's addressing right there, those particular, if you have locks in place, you should have a policy and procedure that speaks to it and probably names offices or storage locations. But more importantly, for a more advanced organization where they would have security logs or key codes or a pass card that you have to get in, that those logs, that process for monitoring and logging who enters, who exits, whether that be an office or the actual exterior of the building and entry and access into the facility, I think that's where that is assessed and interrogated and monitored. So to answer your question directly, I don't think you write down the file cabinets and stuff like that per se, as much as you could, because you can get as granular as you want. They're not telling you can't, but I think that's addressed through like a clean desk policy, through a visitor log policy, and through your physical security log monitoring and review.
Okay, excellent. Well, I appreciate you providing us with your input on that, and certainly enlightening for me to hear how you're interpreting these requirements. So thank you for explaining that to us, Ty.
Yeah, for sure.